Yeah, dear respected Thai, dear noble community, our root teacher Shakyamuni Buddha decided to, as an unenlightened bodhisattva, before he touched the deep insight, decided to live a spiritual life. So he left home, he left his family. As far as we know, he left at least one child with his wife, and also a good position in society, because he was very intelligent. He looked into the world and he saw that there was little fruit and much pain to come from pursuing material things. And we are still learning that lesson in the 21st century. There's still a lot of attraction for material things. And so to come to the monastery and to practice, whether as a layperson or a monk or a nun, means that we have a deep aspiration, like the Buddha, to live a spiritual life. In the 20th century, many people question whether a spiritual life is necessary. And one result from that way of looking was a lot of war and even genocide. We no longer can touch compassion in our heart. And we get caught in the form of religion, and we judge it, we discriminate, and so we want to reject everything to do with the spiritual life. We see this body only as a lump of flesh, and birth and death are just something to be given or taken away, almost without meaning. And so it's very interesting that so many people now are looking for a spiritual life. There's a kind of crisis. We realize that if we don't know how to take care of our mind, then we only live our life as a victim of consumerism, of objects of desire. And if someone controls the objects of desire, we just follow. We follow. And maybe we start out, we don't really want anything, we don't need anything, but then we see other people and they have things. And so that collective consciousness becomes part of our own consciousness. And then we want to have those things as well. And so even if we're a monk or a nun, we are subject to that, that kind of imitation. And it turns out it's not easy to become free from that kind of collective consciousness of just imitating the acquisitiveness of others. So that is why we come together to practice. We've tried to see how can we do this together. Yeah? So the Plum Village way is a middle way. We don't go to the extreme where we just try to reject completely everything to do with society. And at the same time, we are committed to practice, letting go. But we do it as a collective. And that's a very interesting experiment. It's an experiment because that we undertake because we want the effect of it to go out beyond just an individual. It's very inspiring if one person, gives up the material life and all their attachments. We can feel inspired, but we may just say, "Oh, it's too difficult for me." And the Buddha also tried this kind of extreme practice, but eventually he found a middle way, which is not starving oneself, not trying to kind of almost torturing oneself, so as to try not to have any desire for food, for even breathing. But he found out that there was not much fruit to be gained by that kind of practice. So he went back and he started eating normal food to get his strength back. And instead he looked into his mind and he saw what is going on there. What is bringing about this attachment. And so this 29th tenet today is also helping us to go deeper into how to manifest this spiritual life. Birth and death. Are only manifestation or non-manifestation. It means that we think when something is born, it goes from non-being into existence. And that is a kind of wrong view, as we've already learned in many classes. If you grab onto this idea that when something is born, it was not there, and out of nothing, it just manifests. So when a baby is born, we don't recognize all the conditions that have come together to make that child manifest. We have the mother and the father. We know that when a female child is born, she already has in her ovaries all the eggs that she will carry for her whole life. So one condition for the child is already there at the birth of the mother. So in the fetus of the mother, the grandmother, the grandchild is already there. And we can go back even farther, right? From mother to mother. And even before Homo sapiens, into our ancestors. We know that we need air to breathe. That is a condition for the manifestation of the child. We need the coming together of the father and the mother. We need food. Actually, we need a planet with just the right temperature, with water, not too close to a star, not too far away. It should have a magnetic field. It's very helpful to protect against cosmic rays. So that we can start to see that everything, not only on this planet Earth, but in the whole universe, has conspired to contribute to the manifestation of this child. So how can we say from nothing that this child has come to be something? That is a wrong view. And the same is true for everything. The orchid, the bamboo floor. When we look deeply, we see that all these conditions have come together for the manifestation of these phenomena. That is the insight of interbeing. And we've learned it pretty much in every class. Tai over and over again is teaching this way of looking deeply. It's a kind of concentration on interbeing. And so with this tenet, we're just continuing that deep looking. So what we call birth and death, these ideas of from nothing something becomes something, and from something it then becomes nothing again. We through our practice of looking deeply, we can be more we can use a vocabulary which helps us to become free from this way of looking at the world. So we no longer fear death. That from something we become nothing. We see that there's only manifestation. In the early, around the 4th and 5th century, pair of brothers, Asanga and Vasubandhu, they two very profound Buddhist teachers, and they looked deeply into the early teachings of Buddhism, and they wanted to help people to understand more deeply their own mind. And so they looked into the early Buddhist teachings, and they wanted to find ways that we can describe this experience of consciousness. Just as today, neuroscientists are trying to understand the nature of consciousness. They wanted to respond to the need of their time. So the Buddha was teaching and responding to the need of his time, and at that time, many centuries after the Shakyamuni Buddha, there was quite a different time in India. There was a lot more developed spiritual traditions at this point. We had yoga, teachings like the Bhagavad Gita. So in Hinduism, a kind of deeper psychology had developed in a religious practice. At the time of the Buddha, we just had kind of Brahmanism, which included animal sacrifice in order to gain merit. And so Asanga and Vasubandhu, they tried to master the early teachings, and then they offered a teaching which our teacher translates as manifestation only. In Sanskrit, it's Reestablishing. This is Vijnapti is manifestation, Matra is only, and Da is like ness in English, like it makes it an abstract noun. So the only manifestation-ness of things. Vijnapti Mahatrata. And if you're paying attention, you'll see that this word Vijnapti is related to Vijnana, consciousness. And within there is knowing, jna. And Vijna, it means perceiving. This form makes it, if you really want to get into Sanskrit, it makes it causative, to cause something to be perceived. So manifestation is about perception. So what they wanted to help people to understand was that our experience of things is mediated through our perceptions. And so our lived life, right, our experience of suffering and happiness has to do profoundly with our perception of things. And we've learned already to perceive means you need a perceiver and a perceived, a subject and an object, and they manifest at the same time. So there's a cloud, but when I look at the cloud, there's a perception of the cloud, it manifests. There is a perceiver and the perceived. But the perceiver is not in self, it's not me, but due to I consciousness coming in contact with the object, just as we learn from the Buddha's teaching, early Buddhism, I, object, gives rise to I consciousness, which is the perception of a cloud. So the manifestation only teaching thoroughly applies this to every aspect of our experience. This is the clarity that especially Vasubandhu, what both Asanga and Vasubandhu brought to the Buddhist teachings. He helped us to see that when the Buddha is talking about the six senses, eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind, he's helping us to by no longer looking at all these senses as me, mine, or myself, to look at these as processes that are unfolding, and the experience of them are always occurring with both subject and object. And subject and object cannot exist independently of each other. So that's another way of saying non-self, no self. Usually we think, this is me and I am experiencing this. When I eat chocolate cake, I am experiencing eating the chocolate cake. But with manifestation only teachings, with the Buddha's teachings, we look deeply and say there is no me who's experiencing it. There is only the taste, the cake, the taste of the cake in my mouth, and the tongue coming in contact with the taste of the cake that gives rise to taste, right? Taste consciousness. And that is, so the subject in this case is our taste, right? Our tongue. And then the object is the cake, the taste of the cake, which the taste is, we can say, the consciousness that manifests. And everything happens like this. All of our things we see, what we hear, what we smell, taste, and even what we think. For thinking to take place, there has to be mind. A mind which comes in contact with the object of mind, which gives rise to mind consciousness. So manifestation only is just an elucidation of the early teachings of Buddhism to bring clarity. Because at that time, in the Abhidharmic schools, specifically Vasubandhu went to study in a school called the Sarvastivada, which is in the area of what was now Kashmir. And he learned and mastered that teaching, and there was a kind of little bit stuckness on the reality of things. And so in order to free the mind, of the practitioner from getting caught in things existing, like an object existing independently of a subject, they brought in this teaching to kind of get unstuck. Buddhism, which had become very, very kind of rarefied and scholastic, just describing vast categories of every Dhamma, every phenomena in the entire universe. And in order to learn the Dhamma, you had to learn all of this vast teaching in order to, for people to call you an arhat, or perfected one. But some of those monks, even though their knowledge was quite deep, I think that the monks around them looked and they felt that monk is still very angry. If we're not a good attendant for that monk, he snaps at me. How can I call him an arhat? But he learned the Abhidhamma so profoundly. This is my own feeling, what people observed, because those monks maybe rely too much just on knowledge of the Dhamma. Nobody could say that they don't know the Dhamma, but it seemed like they were not so happy, not getting so much joy. And so there needs to be a kind of a reformation, a kind of revolution within the teachings. And so Vasubandhu brought in that revolution, which is to remind us that everything we experience is through our perception. And even we know the Dhamma profoundly, but if we don't practice to understand the nature of manifestation, then we will get stuck and attached, just like anyone. So it's to free ourselves from the obstacle of knowledge that this teaching of manifestation only was brought in and became very profoundly successful. Not only in India, but also in East Asia. Maybe we can listen to the sound of the bell. So Thai says, manifestation means appearing so that we can perceive it or them or something. So we could also say birth and death are only perception or non-perception. So when I look this way, the orchid on the table is not manifesting in my visual consciousness. So can I say that the orchid does not exist? Of course, that would be silly. But I can say that there are not enough conditions because of the nature of light. I cannot see, I cannot perceive through my visual consciousness the orchid that's on the table. And so there are not enough conditions for the orchid to manifest in my visual consciousness. But it's manifesting in my thinking. And then I turn around, oh, now it is manifesting in my visual consciousness, not only in my mind. If I'm turned this way and there's a mirror, I can look and see the reflection of the orchid. So that would be a condition to help manifest. In the reflection, I can have an indirect, you could say, perception of the orchid. Similarly, Vasubandhu used actually later the Buddha's, I want to say later, not sure about that, but Dignaga, a logician, around that time, he used the example of when you see there's a wall and you see smoke rising up. That is through inference we can infer that there's fire. We cannot directly see the fire, but because there is smoke, we can say there is fire. But that smoke might be fog or humidity, right? It could be vapor. And we might have a wrong perception. So although it's boiling water, well, at that time to have boiling water you probably need to have fire. But it could be water vapor and we're not sure that it's fire. Another example is we might see there might be a rope on the ground and we think the rope is a snake. So that is not a problem of the rope, that is a problem of our perception. And so we infer there's a snake, so we jump back. Many times walking around Deer Park, if you go to the mountain, you might see a stick. And when you first look at it, it looks very much like a snake. And so you stop, and you go a little bit close, slowly, to see, is it a snake? It is a stick. So the problem is not the stick is fine, it's our perception which has changed. So these are all ways in which our life is, the examples of ways in which our life is, and our experience of life is profoundly influenced by our perceptions. It's a kind of like very simple examples to see what our mind is doing in every moment. Even the words that I might choose in teaching the class might have an effect on you depending on the way you were raised, whether you're a native English speaker or not. It says something, you start to have perceptions about, he must have grew up in this part of the country or whatever. You have all these feelings just around each word that I choose to use that is communicating something about the collective consciousness and your own experience of something. So in all of this, it's some kind of miracle that we can even have a partial communication. But because language is a collective experience, it only makes sense as a collective experience. As we grow as a child, growing up and hearing language and reading it in a book, we start to have a collective, some kind of similarity of experience around our exposure to words so that we can at least have partial understanding through language. But we know that it's only partial. We cannot get the deep insight only from words alone. And that is why the Buddha taught the Dhamma is like a raft. We need to let go of the Dhamma itself, let alone non-Dhamma, adharma, right? We let go of Dharma and also adharma. the non-Dharma teachings, because we can get stuck. So the manifestation only teachings is to help us with that metaphor of a raft, is to help us to go on the path of letting go of the form, the solidity we attribute to things through our perception. We rely too much on our abstract ideas and notions of things. This is true as well in society. Right? So we look at institutions like the government, and we think, oh, the federal government, Washington DC, in these buildings, and they have rules and regulations, and we rely on those as a collective, that people will abide by those. But in truth, they do not always. And so when they do not, we feel like something inside of our consciousness is broken. We feel like some kind of agreement we had. We thought something was permanent, and it's actually impermanent. And so there's a suffering that happens in the collective consciousness, because what we assume to be solid and stable is actually much less stable and subject to impermanence than we had thought. So our experience of government and the way it functions is based on our collective. Tai gave another example, which is the dollar. You show $1 to a deer, it could care less. What is $1? But because of our conditioning at a collective level, we attribute value to the dollar. So we know I can bring this money down to a store in Escondido and buy some gelato, and they won't look at me strangely if I hold out, a $20 bill. They will know exactly what to do, how to convert it. And we're so used to it that we don't even think of the miracle of this relationship of trust, which happens between taking a piece of paper which looks a certain way, giving it to someone behind the counter, and they give you a gelato. It's really a miracle of collective consciousness that allows that to happen. So without, and when we look and we see the value of the dollar going up and down, we think that there's something really there that's changing, but it's actually just our mind, the collective mind. When we are confident in the dollar, the value goes up. When we are not confident, the value goes down as a collective body. So it is a manifestation of our perception. And so looking at inferring the fire from the smoke, or mistaking the rope for a snake, those are examples to help us to see how everything we experience in every moment is like a magic show. And it is, that magic show is going on in our mind. Tai called it the cinematographic experience of consciousness. It means that we are like a filmmaker. And we make a film in our mind, kind of drama. In our relationships, in our way of looking at the flower. Like, I come in here and the mats and cushions are here, Brother Min-an is sitting at the bell, and I start to make a story about how he came early and he put the orchid on the table and set it up after it was set up beautifully. I can see all that. I was not here to observe that firsthand. And it may be true, but there's a chance it may have happened differently. Maybe Brian came this morning, this afternoon, or maybe Jonathan. or maybe one of the sisters brought the orchid up. Right? So, but I know how it happened before, and so I can, I hedge my bets. I make an estimate, and I function based on that story that I've created. So I painted a story in my mind. There are conditions, the orchid is manifesting. I can see it in my visual consciousness. And so my mind looks deeply and says, how can I try to tell the story of what happened? How can I paint the conditions in my mind, the conditions that have come together to manifest this orchid? So the practice is noticing that, noticing how our mind is creating these films all the time. We don't have to go to film school. Walter is here making films for the community. And that, so we make the film on the computer, and that is telling a story. But it's only an extension of our mind. It's already there telling stories all the time. And mental illness is when the relationship between, for example, one form of mental illness can happen when our perceptions kind of run amok, and there's very little relationship anymore between the world around us and the collective experience of it in the person's mind. They are like creating all kinds of stories, and in order to understand that person, you have to learn all the stories they're creating in their mind. And they can suffer so much because they hear one thing and they create massive stories about it. And so there's a kind of imbalance. It might be chemical, something inherited, or something in the collective, some kind of trauma, which has caused them to create a whole world of perceptions within their mind. And that affects us so deeply because it helps us to see that we all do that. If we are not careful in how we take care of our mind, come back to our body, come back to our breathing, come back to the present moment, observe what is going on, then our mind can also be like that. It can race and run and create all kinds of stories. So that is what I call the cinematographic nature of consciousness. With the practice, he said it's like a person who has a stick with fire on it. And he twirls that flame around. If he moves it very quickly, then it looks like a circle of light. But if we stop it at every moment, we only see one point of light. So consciousness is like that. We perceive this current, this flow, but if we really narrow our vision to each instant, what's called kshana in Buddhism, it's like what they consider the small, I think the 16 in a second, something like that, the smallest unit of consciousness that they could propose at that time. There's just like one frame of a film. But when we run the film through the reel, it appears to be a continuous motion. So this is the nature of manifestation only and the helpfulness of this teaching. Because we see that what we perceive to be a circle is actually just many conditions coming together. And those conditions are also made up of conditions themselves. This is how we get to understand and also become free from our attachment to the orchid, the table, this body. We see it's just processes going on. It's just a wonder. And when conditions are no longer sufficient, these processes end. If perhaps I get glaucoma, and as I get older, and I can no longer see, so the eyes don't have enough conditions anymore to perceive the light coming in. And I might despair about that. But when I understand that the eyes are impermanent, then I can be free. I let go. Okay, I lost those. The senses are deteriorating with old age. So it's a way of freeing ourselves from our suffering when the manifestation no longer manifests. I said both manifestor and manifested occur at the same time. So when we see manifestation is only perception. So this is another way of saying subject and object occur at the same time. If there is only manifestation, then when conditions are sufficient, subject and object manifest at the same time. So when I look at Jonathan, he manifests. If I look away, for me, he ceases to manifest. He still exists in my thinking. So it's kind of like the phrase, out of sight, out of mind. So again, this is not about being or non-being. The problem with our thinking is that we get caught in being and non-being. And that takes us away from our experience of life. We get caught in our idea, our perception about someone. And that perception, for example, in our relationship with our loved one, we have an idea about that person that we love so deeply. And we suffer so much when he or she doesn't behave like our idea about them. If we are not practicing. If we are practicing, we can let go and just say, my loved one is a beautiful manifestation, and I don't know what will happen next. Our mind is open. But if we keep holding on to that idea, that is kind of being, like the being we imagine of that person, we will suffer because they change. They cannot possibly be only that idea. So true love means letting go of being and non-being and allowing the insight of manifestation only to be present. So you can look at your loved one and say, you are a manifestation, I am a manifestation. In this moment, thanks to my eyes, my ears, my nose, my tongue, I am experiencing this wonderful manifestation that I perceive before me. And that helps you touch the preciousness of that person, the wonder of that person. If you just wake up in the morning and you see that person, you think, oh gosh, not another day. And you hear them do this, get up to go to the bathroom at the same time, or make those certain noises, and you start to get irritated. It's because you're holding on to a perception of that person. You've become caught in your perception, and you no longer just see these as manifestations. You think, well, if he makes that funny noise when he goes to the bathroom, maybe there's something in the food last night, or maybe there's something I can do to help. And so that gives you insight and compassion. So in my own practice, I found that this manifestation only teaching really helps me to cultivate compassion, to see that, really honor my sister if she shares something and I see that pain. I just want to be there for it, just to listen and understand. I don't need to share anything, because there's something manifesting and I want to honor that as a practitioner. I might not fully understand it in that moment, but it's a chance for me to look deeply so that in the future I can help so that suffering does not manifest in my sister or brother. So manifestation only is helping us to understand the nature of our perceptions, and in order to become free from attachment to those perceptions, and see everything as a flowing, constantly changing set of processes going on. And that is a wonder, a beauty, like the snow in the winter, or the flowing streams after a rainfall in the spring, the flowers blooming. We don't have to think, oh, I wish the flowers would stay forever, because the manifestation of the flower is due to causes and conditions. And when the conditions are no longer sufficient, it ceases to manifest. And that is also a wonder of life. And Tai added, the manifestation of one thing is the non-manifestation. Of another. Or we can say of something else. So the water flowing in the stream, we can say, is the non-manifestation of the frozen ice river. When there's ice, that is a non-manifestation of the flowing water. So the Buddha said it very simply, when this is, that is. When this comes to be, that comes to be. With the cessation of this, there is a cessation of that. When this ceases to be, that also ceases to be. So that is another way of describing this sentence. The manifestation of one thing is the non-manifestation of something else. Spring is the non-manifestation of winter or fall. So it's a way of understanding impermanence. So everything in the universe is contributing to this experience of the present moment, but not everything is manifesting at the same time. This is what Tai is trying to convey. At the moment, I'm standing here with a marker in my hand. So the manifestation of writing with this hand on the board is not there. It's the non-manifestation of writing on the board. But there are causes and conditions in this hand to write on the board. And if I know how to, all of the art and skill of being raised and taught how to write are there. They are like latent in this hand, and so all I need to do is turn around and go to the board, and then I can make manifest the action of writing on the board. It seems so simple, but it's actually very magical. So this is a kind of deep looking into causes and conditions. And we can also let go when someone or something ceases to manifest. When someone we love so deeply has passed away, we may look at their body and think their consciousness is no longer there. And so the blue sky that's above them is, before that loved one, they could look and see the blue sky, they could experience it, but now they can no longer experience it. But that is a very simplistic way of looking at that dead body and the blue sky. They may not be experiencing it in the form which we are used to experiencing the blue sky. But the decaying cells in their body still have some kind of relationship to the sky, to the water, to the air. So we can see that there is still the manifestation going on. It is just continuing in a new form. And that is no less beautiful than the conscious, the experience of that person, that loved one, as we stand next to them and look up at the blue sky together and feel we have some kind of shared experience. So there's nothing lost when that loved one dies. They're going back to the earth, just like it is the nature of this body to do. And that is happening just according to the nature of impermanence. It is only our perception which causes us to suffer. And when we stand next to our grandchild, it means, if our father passes away, his continuation, that child, and we look up at the sky together, the grandfather is there, also enjoying the blue sky with us. He's just manifesting in a new form. And if we are caught in our idea of our father, we continue to suffer. But if we practice the teaching of manifestation only, we see right away that the grandchild that holds our hand and looks up with us at the sky is the continuation of our grandfather. And not only his grandchild, but anyone who stands with us and looks at the sky and really experiences with us in that moment, this beauty of the wonder of the sky, is the manifestation of our grandfather. So that is the experience of manifestation only. We look deeply with the eyes of no self, and see that there is only manifestation, and that is a continuous wonder. When conditions are sufficient, wonder, looking at the blue sky, manifests. When conditions are no longer sufficient, then there is no wonder looking at the blue sky. But that is also a wonder. So, as a monk, I know that I've seen many of my brothers and sisters manifest as monastics and then cease to manifest as monastics in this form with the robe. After 18 years, I have seen manifest and then cease to manifest. And if I get too caught in that, I think, oh, it's such a pity that brother left or that sister left. Why can't they continue on their path as a monk or a nun? But then I wouldn't see my young brothers who are manifesting and see all the wonderful qualities that they are continuing and in a new form. So, putting on the robe, practicing mindfulness, we are continuing the ancestral teachers as well. We might read in a book about some great Zen master and wish, oh, if only I lived at that time so I could study with that great master. But we don't see the Zen master who's sharing the room with us because they just remind us to brush our teeth after every meal. And we think, that's not a great Zen master. The great Zen master I know and love would never talk to me like that. He would say, he would speak only in poetry and give me great Zen teachings. She wouldn't just remind me to brush my teeth. And that is a failure that is where we're caught in our perception. And we don't see the Zen masters that are around us in every moment, teaching us, giving us insight into our own mind. So this is why I keep coming back to this teaching on no self. It's so profound. When we really go deeply into it, we no longer start to continue to export our sovereignty to some authority out there, some expert. Right? We come back and we reestablish sovereignty in our own mind and see that it's the primacy of our experience. This is what the Buddha was helping us with. One day he held up a few leaves of a tree that grows in India, the simsapa tree. He held them in his hand before the monks and he said, "Monks, are the number of leaves in my hand many, or are they few in comparison to the leaves of the forest?" And the monk said, well, of course, Buddha, the teacher, the leaves in your hand are very few, and the leaves in the forest are very many. And the Buddha said, the same is true of the Dhamma that I teach. My knowledge is vast, like all the leaves on the sinsapa trees in the forest. But what I teach you is it's just this Dhamma, because that is for your liberation, your freedom. And so now with the internet, with access to knowledge that's unprecedented in history, we run the risk of exporting the sovereignty, our own sovereignty. We feel like we are insignificant in comparison to the great vast knowledge that is out there. And we forget that what is most important is our own experience in the present moment. And so we just, tell each other facts and look up on Wikipedia to see, is it like that, or is it, are you right? Am I right? And that's okay. But if we are caught in that, and we cannot become free from it, then it's a pity, because we miss this wonder of living, like our breath. That's the news. My in-breath. Oh, the in-breath is going on. The out-breath is going on. That's what Thai wants to transmit to us. It's just the wonder of living in the present moment, so we don't continue to be caught in just our knowledge about things. It's helpful, to know what's going on in the world, but it can become an addiction. And we need to really be mindful when we go on the internet, when we read the news, just be aware, just come back to your breath. So we have a training in the monastery, which is, we have in the office, we have a clock, or we can put on our computer a bell that reminds us every 15 minutes to come back to our breathing. So we don't get carried away by all the information or the images or videos or whatever we're watching. We come back to reestablish sovereignty in our own mind. This experience is the most important thing going on. It's not what's on the internet, which is the most important. Because if we don't know how to take care of our suffering, what good is what is on the news? It may only contribute to our despair and our suffering, and we just export our sovereignty. We lose our path. We lose our happiness. So the beauty and the relevance of this manifestation-only teaching is that we come back and we see that our perception is where we need to work. This is our own mind. If we know how to generate joy in the present moment, without it being dependent on what we read in our email inbox or on the news, then we have established our sovereignty. But if we are just carried away by whatever flashes on the screen when we open it up, and we feel happy and sad because of that, then that is an indication that we still maybe we need to close the laptop and just breathe for a while. Just come back to our body. Just reestablish in the here and now. Know what is going on in our body, in our feelings, in our perceptions, in our mental formations, in our consciousness. So we see where there is some kind of attachment, some kind of grasping. When we consider manifestor and manifested as being two separate things, that is what we call double grasping. So I say, Brother Min An, he is like this, and I am like that. That is a form of double grasping. I attribute this quality, and I think that is like attached to Brother Min An. And I attribute some other quality to myself. So this kind of thinking, if we're not careful, intrudes on our mind, and it starts to populate our whole way of looking at the world until we just feel like we're trying to push our way through very thick undergrowth. We cannot see clearly what is going on in our own mind anymore. So I try in my practice of living in the Sangha, living with my brothers, living and sisters, to try to look always with the eyes of like freshness. Just to not carry over my suffering, my perceptions about that brother. I'm not always successful, I make a lot of mistakes. But I know that when I do that, I'm participating in this double grasping. In Sanskrit, it's graha, dvaya. Like, this is dvaya is like a duo, like in Latin, or a duplicate, right? It's the same. The V is like a U. It means two. And graha is like the English word for grasping, to try to grasp at something. And this double grasping has a collective aspect as well as an individual aspect. Democrat, Republican. Black, white. North, south. Left, right. So if we get caught in thinking, for example, I wish the right would just go away and then the world would be a happy place. That is participating in double grasping. You think that the left can exist without the right. But the left can only exist thanks to the right. If you take away the right, well, you just have a new right. And that kind of ignorance has pervaded our collective consciousness. And so we become polarized, and the left fights the right. Right? So with the eyes of interbeing, we have to see that they're all just manifestations of our collective consciousness. And so the Buddha invited us to look into suffering, because he said that helps us to free ourselves from this double grasping. We just look at the experience of ill-being that is going on in the individual, in the collective, and we try to understand, how did that manifest? What are the causes and conditions that give rise to this suffering? So that we can learn to remove, to be skillful practitioners, to remove the causes and conditions that give rise to the suffering. But when we are caught in double grasping, we just take one side and then we fight against the other side. And then the suffering only increases and becomes worse. And the insight is that this happens in our own mind, just in the way that it happens in the collective consciousness. So if you say that you are a worker and you want to fight against the bourgeoisie, that is also double grasping. If you say you are a patriot and you want to fight against the foreigner, the ungrateful citizen, that is also a manifestation of double grasping. So it seems like a very, when you look at the surface, it seems, what is the big deal about this double grasping? But when you see the violence that manifests in the world due to this tendency of our mind, then you feel deeply moved to transform that nature in our mind. You really want to find a way to overcome this tendency to split the world into this and that, left and right, up and down, and so forth. And see that for up to manifest, down also has to manifest. For right to manifest, right away left also manifests. And seeing that, you're no longer caught in up or down, left and right, being and non-being. That is a non-dual awareness. That is of a practitioner, not to get caught in sides. And concretely, Thai practiced this in Vietnam. In the South, they accused him of being a communist. And the communists accused him of being a collaborator with the imperialists. And so Thai proposed a middle way, but neither side was happy, because you have to take a side. And so Thai had to go very deeply. Each of us, we live our life in relative comfort. It doesn't seem that there's somebody who might throw a grenade like they did to our teacher in his room in Phap Luu temple in Saigon. They threw a grenade into Thai's room, and it hit the curtain and bounced out. And so we might not perceive that we have that danger at our door. But if you know how dangerous an untrained mind is, then you would practice right away to let go of grasping. Because when you are caught in a fight, flee or freeze situation, if you are not trained well, you will rely on your mind of double grasping. So when we are in a good condition like this, when we have spiritual friends around us, when we feel safe, that is a time to practice letting go. Coming back to our breathing, coming back to our body. Because when we are in a challenging situation, when we lose our health, we get sick, we are maybe in a precarious situation, if we have not made good use of this time in the Sangha to free ourselves from double grasping, we will revert to it, for sure. That is it. It is our nature to do it. And we will make ourselves suffer and make others suffer. So this teaching on manifestation only is to help us to overcome the tendency to grasp at one thing or another. We see that everything is related in a causal way. The manifestation of one thing is the non-manifestation of something else. And this is the teaching on store consciousness that we've already learned many, many times. That there are seeds. It's a way of saying there are latent things. They are not manifesting in this moment. Like at this moment, anger is not manifesting in my mind consciousness. There is joy. But if I'm not careful and someone says something like, "Brother Phap Luu, your class is so boring," oh, right away I feel angry. And I feel, so that what happened to my joy? It ceased to manifest, and there's a manifestation of something else that is latent in my consciousness. Suddenly anger manifests. So the manifestation of anger is the non-manifestation of joy. And so forth. That goes for all things. So nothing is lost. This is another way of saying nothing is lost. Just because it is not there, we don't perceive it, doesn't mean it has gone into non-existence. And because it is not there, when we perceive it, it doesn't mean that it exists. So we maintain our mind in equanimity. This is actually how we cultivate this broad mind of inclusiveness. We can include birth and death, being and non-being, all of these opposites, without any anger or fear. That is to make our mind peaceful and calm. It is not because we are a failure that our project does not succeed. It is because conditions are not sufficient. It is not because God is unjust when our loved one dies young. It is because conditions are no longer sufficient. But if we know how to look deeply, we see our loved one manifesting in new forms, in the cloud, in the rain, in the flower. And we can smile with joy because our loved one is still there in every part of the universe, in the beautiful sunset and our every breath. He is still there, she is still there. That is a teaching on manifestation only. So I wish you good practice of this tenet. Maybe this week you can practice looking and just seeing as your feelings manifest and cease to manifest. Just observe that. And you don't get attached to that feeling, think this is me or mine. Just watch it happening. It's a miracle. You can see what causes and conditions brought that feeling into its present form, and when it passes, what are the cessation of conditions that allow it to cease to manifest. That's something I practice very often in my own feelings to help me get free from attachment to pleasant feelings, unpleasant feelings, neutral feelings. You just watch them come and go like clouds in the sky. So that's a very practical way to apply this teaching of manifestation only. Thank you for your practice and your deep listening.